The phone call came at 3 in the morning. Lisa was deep asleep when her cell phone started buzzing on the nightstand. She fumbled for it in the darkness, her heart already racing because nothing good ever happened at this hour. "Lisa, this is Dr. Peterson from Mercy General Hospital." The voice was gentle but serious. "I'm sorry to tell you this, but your grandmother passed away peacefully about an hour ago." The words hit her like a truck. Even though Grandma Rose had been sick for months, Lisa wasn't ready. She would never be ready to lose the woman who raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was 12. 3 weeks later, Lisa found herself standing in front of the small white house at 47 Maple Street in Willowbrook Estates. The house looked exactly the same as it had during her childhood visits. The same red door her grandmother had painted every spring. The same flower boxes under the front windows where Rose grew her famous petunias. The same welcome mat that said, "Bless this mess," in faded letters. The lawyer had explained everything clearly. Grandma Rose left the house to Lisa, along with a small savings account and her old Toyota. It wasn't much money, but the house was paid off completely. Rose had worked 2 jobs for 30 years to make sure of that. Lisa walked up the front steps, fishing the keys from her pocket. She was about to unlock the door when a sharp voice cut through the quiet morning air. "Excuse me, you can't just walk into that house." Lisa turned around to see a woman marching across the street toward her. The woman was probably in her 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and clothes that looked like they came from an expensive store. Everything about her screamed, "I'm in charge here." "I'm sorry?" Lisa said, confused. "This is my grandmother's house." "Well, my house now, I guess." The woman stopped right in front of Lisa and crossed her arms. "I'm Margaret Walsh, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. And there are some serious problems we need to discuss." Lisa blinked. "Problems? What kind of problems?" Margaret pulled out a folder that seemed to appear from nowhere. "Multiple violations of our community standards. Look at this mailbox." She pointed to the slightly tilted mailbox at the end of the driveway. "The paint is chipping. That's a clear violation of Section 12 of our community guidelines." Lisa looked at the mailbox. Sure enough, there were a few small spots where the black paint was peeling. She'd never noticed it before, but now that Margaret pointed it out, it was obvious. "And this lawn," Margaret continued, waving her hand dismissively. "It's at least an inch too long. Our regulations clearly state that grass cannot exceed 2 inches in height." Lisa stared at the lawn. It looked perfectly normal to her. Maybe a little long, but nothing crazy. "My grandmother just passed away 3 weeks ago. I've been dealing with funeral arrangements and legal stuff. I haven't had time to—" "That's not my problem," Margaret cut her off. "Rules are rules. We maintain high standards in this community and every homeowner is expected to comply. No exceptions." Lisa felt her face getting hot. This woman was talking about her grandmother's house like it was some kind of eyesore. The same house where Rose had lived peacefully for 22 years. "I'll take care of the mailbox and the lawn," Lisa said, trying to keep her voice calm. "Is there anything else?" Margaret flipped through her folder. "Actually, yes. That garden gnome by the front steps has to go. Lawn ornaments are strictly prohibited under our aesthetic guidelines." Lisa looked at the little ceramic gnome sitting next to Rose's flower boxes. Her grandmother had bought it at a garage sale 5 years ago, and absolutely loved it. She'd named him Harold and always said he brought good luck to her flowers. "You want me to get rid of Harold?" Lisa asked. "Harold?" Margaret looked disgusted. "You named it? Look, I don't care what sentimental value it has. It violates our community standards and it needs to go. Today." Lisa took a deep breath. She was tired, stressed, and still grieving. The last thing she needed was some power-hungry neighbor telling her what she could and couldn't do with her own property. "Fine," she said. "I'll move the gnome inside." "Good. Now, about your plans for this property." Margaret's tone became even more serious. "I hope you're planning to sell it soon. This neighborhood works best when it's occupied by families who understand and appreciate our community values." There was something in the way Margaret said, "community values," that made Lisa's skin crawl. Like there was a hidden meaning she was supposed to understand. "Actually, I'm planning to move in," Lisa said. "I'm a nurse at the hospital downtown and this would cut my commute in half." Margaret's face changed completely. The fake smile disappeared and her eyes got cold. "I see. Well, that's certainly your right. But I hope you understand that living in Willowbrook Estates comes with certain expectations. We've worked very hard to maintain the character of this neighborhood. Over the next 2 weeks, Lisa learned exactly what Margaret meant by expectations. Every other day, there was a new violation notice taped to her door. The doormat was the wrong color. The newspaper was left on the driveway too long. There were leaves on the sidewalk that needed to be swept immediately. Each violation came with a $50 fine. Lisa tried to keep up with all the demands, but it felt impossible. She was working 12-hour shifts at the hospital, trying to pack up her apartment and dealing with her grandmother's belongings. Every time she fixed one problem, Margaret found two more. The worst part was how Margaret treated her during their encounters. There was always this condescending tone, like she was talking to a child who couldn't understand simple instructions. Margaret would walk by the house every morning at exactly 8 o'clock, clipboard in hand, looking for new things to complain about. One morning, Lisa was outside watering the flower boxes when Margaret appeared with another violation notice. "The garden hose needs to be wound up properly and stored out of sight," Margaret announced, not even bothering with a greeting. "I'm literally using it right now," Lisa said, gesturing to the water still running. "That's fine. But when you're done, it needs to be put away. We can't have unsightly equipment cluttering up people's yards." Lisa turned off the water and started coiling up the hose. "Can I ask you something? Did you give my grandmother this much trouble?" Margaret's expression softened slightly, but only for a second. "Your grandmother was a lovely woman, but she was getting older. Sometimes older residents need gentle reminders about maintaining their properties." "Gentle reminders? You mean like $50 fines every other day?" "The fines are clearly outlined in the HOA guidelines that every resident receives. If your grandmother chose not to read them, that's not my fault," Lisa wanted to scream. Rose had never mentioned any problems with the HOA. In fact, she'd always talked about how much she loved living in Willowbrook Estates because it was so quiet and peaceful. That afternoon, Lisa decided to talk to some of the neighbors. Maybe they could help her understand what was going on. Mrs. Chen, who lived next door, seemed nervous when Lisa knocked on her door. "Oh, hello, dear. I'm so sorry about your grandmother. She was such a sweet woman. Thank you. I was wondering if you could tell me about the HOA here. I'm having some issues with Margaret Walsh." Mrs. Chen looked around nervously, like she was worried someone might be listening. "Margaret can be difficult. She takes her job very seriously." "Has she always been this strict about the rules?" "It's gotten worse over the years, especially with newer residents or people she doesn't think fit in well here." Mrs. Chen paused. "Your grandmother never had these problems until the last few months. What changed?" Mrs. Chen hesitated. "Well, Margaret's daughter and her husband have been looking for a house in this area. Margaret mentioned several times how nice it would be if they could find something nearby." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. "You think Margaret wants my house for her daughter?" "I'm not saying that," Mrs. Chen said quickly. "I'm just telling you what I've observed. But you didn't hear it from me, okay?" That evening, Lisa sat in her grandmother's living room, surrounded by boxes of Rose's belongings. The violation notices were piled up on the coffee table like a paper monument to Margaret's harassment. Lisa counted them up. 14 violations in 2 weeks, $700 in fines, for things like having her trash can visible from the street and parking her car 6 inches too far from the curb. She picked up one of the notices and read it again. At the bottom, in small print, it said that failure to pay fines within 30 days could result in a lien against the property. Lisa's blood ran cold. A lien meant that if she couldn't pay the fines, the HOA could potentially force her to sell the house to cover the debt. She grabbed her laptop and started researching HOA laws in her state. What she found made her stomach turn. In some cases, homeowners associations really could force the sale of properties to collect unpaid fees and fines. Margaret wasn't just being difficult. She was building a case to take away Lisa's house, and the worst part was, it might actually be legal. 2 months after moving into her grandmother's house, Lisa thought she was finally getting ahead of Margaret's endless demands. She'd painted the mailbox, trimmed the lawn weekly, and even bought new doormats in the approved colors. The violation notices had slowed down to maybe 1 a week instead of every other day. Then her dad got sick. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Lisa was getting ready for work. Her stepmother was crying so hard Lisa could barely understand her. "It's your father," she sobbed. "He had a massive heart attack. The doctors don't know if he's going to make it." Lisa's dad lived 4 states away in Arizona. They weren't super close anymore, but he was still her father, the last family she had left after losing her grandmother. "I'm coming," Lisa said without hesitation. I'll be on the next flight out. She called in sick to work, threw some clothes in a suitcase, and drove straight to the airport. Before leaving, she quickly watered the plants and made sure everything looked neat around the house. The last thing she needed was Margaret finding new things to complain about while she was gone. Lisa spent a week in Arizona, sleeping in uncomfortable hospital chairs and drinking terrible coffee from vending machines. Her dad pulled through, thank God, but he needed surgery and weeks of recovery. Lisa couldn't just abandon him. She called her supervisor at the hospital and explained the situation. Luckily, they were understanding and approved her for emergency family leave. She also called Mrs. Chen next door and asked if she could keep an eye on the house. Of course, dear, Mrs. Chen said. Don't worry about anything here. Just take care of your father. Lisa stayed in Arizona for another week and a half, making sure her dad was stable and helping arrange for his home care. It was the longest she'd been away from the house since moving in. When she finally flew back home, something felt wrong the moment her taxi turned onto Maple Street. There was a moving truck in her driveway. Not just any moving truck, but a big professional one with 3 guys carrying furniture out of her house. Stop, Lisa yelled to the taxi driver. Stop right here. She threw money at the driver and ran toward her house, her suitcase bouncing behind her. One of the movers was carrying her grandmother's antique rocking chair out the front door. Hey, what are you doing? That's my house. That's my stuff. The mover stopped and looked confused. Lady, we're just doing our job. We got orders to clear out this place for the new owners. New owners? What are you talking about? I'm the owner. A familiar voice came from behind her. Actually, that's not correct anymore. Lisa spun around to see Margaret walking up the driveway with a younger woman who looked like a blonde version of herself. The woman was probably in her 30s, wearing expensive workout clothes and carrying a designer purse. Margaret, what is going on here? Lisa demanded. Margaret held up a thick folder of papers. I tried to reach you, but you seem to have disappeared. When homeowners abandon their properties and fail to respond to official notices, the HOA has legal remedies available. Abandon? I was taking care of my sick father. I told Mrs. Chen I'd be gone. Mrs. Chen isn't an official representative of the HOA, Margaret said coldly. You are required to file proper paperwork for any extended absence. You didn't do that. The younger woman stepped forward with a bright fake smile. Hi, I'm Jennifer Walsh, Margaret's daughter. I just wanted to say how excited we are about our new home. It's going to be perfect for my family. Lisa felt like the world was spinning. Your new home? This is my home. Margaret pulled out a legal document. Due to your failure to pay accumulated fines and your abandonment of the property, the HOA board voted to exercise our rights under the community guidelines. The property has been sold to cover your debts. Lisa grabbed the papers with shaking hands. The legal language was confusing, but she could make out the important parts. Total fines, $15,947. Emergency maintenance fees, $8,200. Legal costs, $3,500. $27,000. Lisa's voice cracked.
How is that possible?
Margaret flipped through her own copy of the paperwork. Let's see. Failure to maintain lawn standards, multiple violations of aesthetic guidelines, improper waste disposal, unauthorized modifications to the property. What unauthorized modifications? You moved that garden gnome without filing the proper paperwork. Any changes to landscaping require board approval. Lisa stared at her. I moved Harold 6 inches to the left so I could water the flowers better. Unauthorized modification is unauthorized modification, Margaret said. The fines accumulated daily while you were gone. Plus, since no one was maintaining the property, we had to hire professionals to handle emergency lawn care and basic upkeep. Those costs are the homeowner's responsibility. Jennifer jumped in with her perky voice. The good news is we were able to purchase the property at the sheriff's sale and save it from going to some stranger. We'll take really good care of it. Sheriff's sale? Lisa felt dizzy. When was there a sheriff's sale? Margaret checked her phone. Last Thursday at 10 a.m. as legally required. All proper notices were sent to your address of record. But I was here. I was in Arizona, but this is my address. I never got any notices about a sale. Well, that's strange, Margaret said, not sounding surprised at all. Maybe there was a problem with the mail service. Regardless, the sale was legal and properly conducted. Jennifer and her husband purchased the property for $45,000. Lisa's head was spinning. The house was worth at least $250,000. Her grandmother had always said it was the best investment she ever made. 45,000? That's impossible. This house is worth way more than that. Jennifer shrugged. That's what happens at sheriff's sales. Properties sell for whatever people are willing to bid. We were the only bidders, so we got a great deal. The only bidders? How is that possible? Margaret started walking toward the house. Well, these sales are usually only advertised in the legal notices section of the newspaper. Not many people read those. Plus, it was at 10 a.m. on a Thursday. Most people are working. Lisa followed them, watching helplessly as the movers continued loading her belongings into their truck. Wait, what about my stuff? My grandmother's things? Oh, we're having everything put in storage, Jennifer said cheerfully. You can pick it up any time. The storage fees are only $60 a day. $60 a day? Well, we couldn't just leave it on the street, Margaret said. That would violate community standards. Lisa pulled out her phone with shaking hands. I'm calling the police. This has to be illegal somehow. Margaret and Jennifer exchanged a look. Of course, that's your right, Margaret said. But I should mention that all the paperwork has been filed with the county. The deed transfer is already recorded. Legally speaking, Jennifer owns this property now. Lisa dialed 911, but when the operator asked about her emergency, she didn't know what to say. Someone stole my house sounded crazy even to her. 2 police officers showed up about 20 minutes later. They were polite but clearly didn't understand the situation any better than Lisa did. Ma'am, this looks like a civil matter, the older officer said after looking at Margaret's paperwork. If there's a dispute about property ownership, you'll need to talk to a lawyer. But they're stealing my house, Lisa protested. Actually, we have legal ownership, Jennifer said, pulling out her own set of papers. We bought it fair and square at a sheriff's sale. The officer looked at Lisa sympathetically. I'm sorry, but property disputes aren't something we can handle. You'll need to take this up in civil court. After the police left, Lisa stood on the sidewalk watching the movers finish loading her life into their truck. Neighbors were peeking out their windows, but no one came over to help or even ask what was happening. Mrs. Chen finally walked over, looking upset. Lisa, dear, what's going on? Margaret sold my house while I was taking care of my father, Lisa said, trying not to cry. Mrs. Chen glanced nervously at Margaret, who was standing on the front porch supervising the movers. I'm so sorry. I had no idea this was going to happen. Did you see any notices posted about a sale? No, nothing like that, although Mrs. Chen hesitated. I did see Margaret talking to the mailman a few times while you were gone. I thought it was strange because she usually just complains about mail delivery. Margaret walked over to them. Mrs. Chen, I hope you'll welcome the Walsh family to the neighborhood. I'm sure they'll be much more engaged with our community activities. Mrs. Chen just nodded and quickly walked back to her house. By evening, Lisa was standing in an empty house that no longer belonged to her. Jennifer had graciously allowed her to stay one night to figure things out, but made it clear she needed to be gone by morning. Lisa sat on the floor of her grandmother's bedroom, surrounded by the few personal items the movers had missed. She found Rose's old jewelry box tucked behind a dresser. Inside was a note in her grandmother's handwriting. My dear Lisa, it read, This house has been in our family for 22 years. I pray it will be yours for many more. Remember that home isn't just about the building. It's about the love that fills it. But if anyone ever tries to take what's rightfully yours, don't give up without a fight. Love always, Grandma Rose. Lisa held the note against her chest and finally let herself cry. Tomorrow she'd have to find a lawyer and figure out how to fight this. Tonight she just needed to grieve for everything she'd lost. Outside she could hear Jennifer and her husband moving their belongings into the house. Their voices were cheerful and excited, talking about paint colors and furniture arrangements. They had no idea that in just a few months, their perfect new home would become the center of a criminal investigation that would destroy their lives. But that night, sitting alone in her stolen house, Lisa had no idea her brother was about to become the most powerful person in the county. Lisa spent the next 3 weeks living in a cheap motel room, trying to figure out how her life had fallen apart so quickly. The storage fees for her belongings were adding up every day, and she was burning through her savings just to survive. She'd called every lawyer in town, but the story was always the same. Property law was complicated, and fighting an HOA required serious money, the kind of money she didn't have. It could cost $30,000 just to get started, one lawyer told her. And even then, there's no guarantee we'd win. HOAs have a lot of legal power when it comes to collecting fees and enforcing their rules. Lisa hung up the phone and stared at the legal papers spread across her motel room bed. The more she studied them, the more suspicious everything looked. Some of the dates didn't make sense. The signatures looked weird, and the total amount of fines seemed impossible for the violations Margaret had listed. She decided to do some detective work of her own. Her first stop was the county courthouse. The clerk at the property records office was friendly and helpful, which was the first good news Lisa had gotten in weeks. "I need to see all the paperwork for the sheriff's sale of 47 Maple Street," Lisa said. The clerk pulled up the records on her computer and frowned. "That's strange. The posting requirements for sheriff's sales are very specific. It has to be advertised in the newspaper for 3 consecutive weeks and notices have to be mailed to the property owner. What does it show for my address?" The clerk squinted at the screen. "It shows notices were mailed to 47 Maple Street, Unit B, is that correct?" "No, there is no Unit B, it's just a single-family house." That is odd. Let me print this out for you." Lisa's hands were shaking as she looked at the paperwork. Not only was her address wrong, but the newspaper advertisements were buried in tiny print in the legal notices section. And they were published on 3 random days, not 3 consecutive weeks like they were supposed to be. "This is definitely not right," the clerk said. "Sheriff's sales have to follow very strict procedures. This looks like someone made some serious mistakes." Lisa's next stop was the newspaper office. The advertising manager was confused when Lisa showed him the legal notices. "We don't usually handle legal advertising," he said. "There's a specific person who handles that, and she's very careful about following the rules. Let me call her over." The legal advertising clerk looked at the notices and immediately shook her head. "I didn't place these ads. Someone submitted them directly to our printing department and bypassed our normal procedures. Is that legal? Absolutely not. All legal notices have to go through me so I can verify they meet the legal requirements. Someone definitely broke protocol here." Lisa felt a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. If the sale wasn't conducted properly, maybe she could get her house back. But her hope was quickly crushed when she tried to report what she'd found. The sheriff's department was polite but unhelpful. "Ma'am, sheriff's sales are handled by a different department," the deputy told her. "You'll need to talk to the civil division." The civil division sent her to the property department. The property department sent her back to the sheriff's department. After 3 hours of being bounced around, Lisa finally got to talk to Deputy Rick Morrison, the man who had supposedly conducted the sale. "Look, lady, I don't remember every sale we do," Morrison said, barely looking up from his paperwork. "If the judge signed off on it, then it was legal. That's all I can tell you. But the addresses were wrong and the newspaper notices weren't published correctly." Morrison shrugged. "Mistakes happen. Doesn't mean the sale isn't valid," Lisa wanted to scream. "How can a sale be valid if it wasn't conducted legally? That's not for me to decide. You'll have to take it up with a judge." Lisa left the sheriff's office feeling more frustrated than ever. It seemed like no one cared that her house had been stolen right out from under her. That evening, she decided to drive by her old neighborhood. She told herself she was just checking on her grandmother's flower boxes, but really she needed to see the house. It was like picking at a scab. Jennifer's husband was in the driveway, unloading groceries from an expensive SUV. He looked up and waved cheerfully, like he didn't recognize her. "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" he called out. Lisa just stared at him. This man was living in her house, sleeping in her grandmother's bedroom, probably cooking dinner in Rose's kitchen, and he seemed completely oblivious to how he'd gotten there. "Excuse me," Lisa said, walking over to him. "I'm Lisa, I used to live here." His face changed completely. The friendly smile disappeared and he looked uncomfortable. "Oh, you're the previous owner." "Actually, I'm still the owner. Your wife bought stolen property." He glanced around nervously. "Look, I don't know anything about the legal stuff. My mother-in-law handled all that. We just bought a house that was for sale." "For $45,000? You didn't think that was suspicious?" "We got a good deal," he said defensively. "That happens sometimes at auctions. Did you even look at comparable property values in this neighborhood? This house is worth 6 times what you paid for it." He started walking toward the front door with his groceries. "I'm not discussing this with you. If you have legal issues, talk to a lawyer." The front door slammed shut, leaving Lisa standing alone in the driveway of her own house. As she walked back to her car, Mrs. Chen appeared from her backyard. "Lisa, how are you holding up?" "Not great, Mrs. Chen. I'm trying to figure out how this happened. But everyone keeps telling me it's a civil matter and there's nothing they can do." Mrs. Chen looked around nervously, then gestured for Lisa to come closer. "Can I tell you something? But you have to promise you won't say where you heard it." "Of course. I've been watching Margaret since you left and some strange things have been happening. She's been having a lot of meetings with people I don't recognize, and I saw her giving something to the mailman right before you came back." "What do you mean giving him something?" "It looked like money. She handed him an envelope and they talked for a few minutes. Then he left without delivering any mail to your house." Lisa felt her heart racing. "You think she was bribing the mailman?" "I don't know for sure, but it was definitely weird. And there's something else. I heard Margaret on the phone yesterday and she was talking about taking care of the Thompson property next." "The Thompsons?" "They live 3 streets over. Mr. Thompson has been sick lately. His wife is struggling to keep up with the yard work." Lisa felt sick. If Margaret had really figured out a way to steal houses from struggling homeowners, the Thompsons could be next. That night, Lisa sat in her motel room and made a list of everything suspicious about her case. The wrong address on the legal notices, the improper newspaper advertisements, the convenient timing while she was out of town, Margaret's daughter being the only bidder at the sale. It all pointed to fraud, but she still couldn't prove it. Lisa decided to try a different approach. Instead of focusing on the legal aspects, maybe she should follow the money. Where did Margaret get the authority to rack up $27,000 in fines? How did she have the power to order emergency maintenance without Lisa's permission? She went back to the courthouse the next day, this time to look at HOA records. What she found made her blood boil. The HOA board meeting minutes showed that Margaret had been making decisions completely on her own. There was no record of any board meetings to approve the fines Lisa had received. No votes on emergency maintenance. No discussion of changing the rules about property abandonment. According to the official records, Margaret had been acting without any authority from the HOA board for months. Lisa printed out everything she could find and took it straight to the district attorney's office. Maybe this was criminal fraud instead of just a civil dispute. The receptionist was sympathetic but not encouraging. Property crimes aren't really our priority unless there's clear evidence of fraud involving large amounts of money. This is large amounts of money. They stole a house worth $250,000. I understand your frustration, but HOA disputes are usually handled in civil court. The prosecutor would need overwhelming evidence of criminal intent to get involved. Lisa left the DA's office feeling defeated. It seemed like Margaret had figured out the perfect crime. She was stealing houses using legal loopholes and nobody in law enforcement cared enough to stop her. That evening, Lisa called her brother David for the first time in 2 years. They'd had a falling out over their father's medical care, and both of them were too stubborn to make the first move toward reconciliation. But she was desperate, and David was the only family she had left. The phone rang 4 times before he picked up. "Lisa, is everything okay?" Just hearing his voice made her start crying. "David, I'm in trouble. Someone stole my house and nobody will help me." "What do you mean someone stole your house?" Lisa spent the next hour telling him everything that had happened. David listened without interrupting, which was more than anyone else had done. "This Margaret woman sounds like she's running some kind of scam," he said when she finished. "But you're right that it's going to be hard to prove. I don't know what else to do. I'm almost out of money, and every lawyer I talk to wants a huge retainer just to get started." "Let me look into some things," David said. "I might be able to help you more than you think." "What do you mean?" David was quiet for a moment. "There are some things about my job situation that have changed recently. Things I haven't told you about yet." "What kind of things?" "I'll explain later. But Lisa, I want you to promise me something. Don't give up on this. Don't let them win." After they hung up, Lisa felt a tiny bit of hope for the first time in weeks. She didn't know what David was planning, but at least she wasn't completely alone anymore. What she didn't know was that David had just been appointed as the new police chief of the county, and he was about to turn Margaret's perfect crime into her worst nightmare. David Peterson had been putting off this conversation with his sister for too long. When Lisa called him crying about losing her house, he realized it was time to tell her about his new job. "Lisa, I need to tell you something." David said during their second phone call the next evening. Remember how I was working in internal affairs for the state police? Yeah, you said you were investigating corruption in different police departments. Well, 3 months ago I got offered a promotion. A big one. I'm the new police chief here in Riverside County. There was silence on the other end of the phone. Wait, what? You're a police chief now? I haven't told anyone in the family yet because I wanted to get settled in first. The county hired me from outside because they needed someone with no local connections to clean up some problems they'd been having. Lisa's voice got excited for the first time in weeks. David, do you realize what this means? You have the authority to investigate what happened to my house. That's exactly what I was thinking. But Lisa, I need you to understand something. If I investigate this, I have to do it completely by the book. I can't show any favoritism just because you're my sister. If there's criminal activity here, I'll pursue it. But if it turns out to be a legal civil matter, there's nothing I can do. I understand. But David, there's definitely something criminal going on. The paperwork doesn't add up. The sale procedures weren't followed correctly, and I think Margaret is bribing people. David was quiet for a moment. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I want you to gather every piece of documentation you have. Every violation notice, every legal paper, every receipt. Bring it all to my office tomorrow morning, but come to the back entrance. I don't want anyone to know we're related until I understand what we're dealing with. The next morning, Lisa sat in David's office with a box full of paperwork spread across his desk. David had changed a lot since she'd seen him last. He looked more serious, more official in his police uniform, but his eyes still had the same kindness she remembered from when they were kids. Walk me through everything again, David said, taking notes. And this time I want you to focus on specific dates and names. Lisa went through the whole story again, watching David's expression get more serious as she talked. When she got to the part about Deputy Morrison dismissing her concerns, David's jaw tightened. Rick Morrison handled your case? You know him? Unfortunately, yes. He's been on my watch list since I started here. There have been some complaints about his procedures, but nothing concrete enough to act on. David studied the sheriff's sale paperwork carefully. Lisa, some of these signatures look off to me. And the timing of everything is way too convenient. What do you mean? Think about it. Margaret starts harassing you immediately after you inherit the house. The fines escalate dramatically while you're out of town. The sale happens with only one bidder, who just happens to be Margaret's daughter. And all the proper notification procedures were somehow messed up. David pulled out his laptop and started typing. I'm going to run some background checks. Let's see what we can find out about Margaret Walsh and her family. What they found was very interesting. Margaret's daughter Jennifer had been looking at houses in the area for over a year, but all the properties she'd inquired about were way out of her price range. Her husband had a decent job, but not the kind that could afford a $250,000 house. Look at this, David said, pointing to his screen. Jennifer and her husband applied for a mortgage 6 months ago and got denied. Their debt-to-income ratio was too high. So how did they suddenly have $45,000 in cash for the sheriff's sale? That's a very good question. Let me check something else. David ran a credit check on Margaret and found something even more suspicious. 2 weeks before Lisa's sheriff's sale, Margaret had taken out a home equity loan for $50,000. She borrowed money against her own house right before your sale, David said. That's not proof of anything illegal, but it's definitely suspicious timing. David spent the next hour making phone calls to various county offices. Lisa watched him work, feeling hopeful for the first time since this nightmare started. Her brother had always been good at solving puzzles, and now he had the authority to actually do something about it. Okay, I got some interesting information, David said after hanging up from his final call. First, the county clerk who processed your sale paperwork is Morrison's brother-in-law. Second, the postal worker who was supposed to deliver your legal notices called in sick for a week right when those notices should have been delivered. Called in sick, or was paid to stay home? I'm going to find out. Lisa, I think you're right that there's criminal activity here, but I need to investigate this carefully. If Margaret really is running a fraud operation, I want to make sure we catch everyone involved and build a case that will stick. Over the next 2 weeks, David quietly investigated Margaret's activities. What he found was worse than either of them had imagined. Margaret hadn't just stolen Lisa's house. She'd been running the same scam for 3 years, targeting elderly homeowners and people she thought wouldn't fight back. David discovered that the Hendersons, an elderly couple 3 blocks away, had lost their house 18 months earlier under almost identical circumstances. Margaret had harassed them with violation notices while Mr. Henderson was in the hospital with cancer. When they couldn't keep up with the fines, their house was sold at a sheriff's sale to Margaret's nephew for $30,000. The Patel family had lost their house the year before that. Margaret had targeted them after Mr. Patel lost his job and they fell behind on some HOA fees. Same pattern: excessive fines, improper sale procedures, and a Walsh family member getting the property for a fraction of its value. "David, this is horrible," Lisa said when he shared his findings. "How many families has she destroyed?" "At least 3 that I can prove so far, maybe more." "But Lisa, here's the thing. Now that I know what to look for, I can see exactly how she's doing it." David explained Margaret's system. She would target vulnerable homeowners and escalate minor violations into major fines. She had Deputy Morrison in her pocket to handle the sheriff's sales improperly. She bribed postal workers to intercept legal notices, and she had someone at the county courthouse helping her falsify paperwork. "It's actually a pretty sophisticated operation," David said. "She's been careful to make everything look legal on the surface. But now you can stop her, right?" "I'm going to do more than stop her. I'm going to make sure she pays for every house she's stolen." David had been building his case quietly, but he needed one more piece of evidence to make it ironclad. He decided to set up a sting operation. "Lisa, I need you to do something for me, and it might be dangerous." "What do you mean?" "I want you to go talk to Margaret. Tell her you're willing to drop your claim to the house in exchange for some money. See if you can get her to admit what she did." Lisa felt nervous but also excited. "You want me to wear a wire?" "Exactly. If we can get her to confess on tape, we'll have everything we need." 3 days later, Lisa sat in Margaret's living room with a tiny recording device hidden in her purse. Margaret looked smug and confident, like she was enjoying Lisa's defeat. "I'm glad you're finally being reasonable about this," Margaret said. "Fighting the HOA is always a losing battle." "I just want to move on with my life," Lisa said. "But I'm really struggling financially. Losing the house wiped out my savings." Margaret leaned back in her chair. "Well, that's unfortunate, but it's not my responsibility. You should have paid more attention to the community rules." "I know, but some of those fines seemed really high for minor violations, and the timing was just terrible with my dad being sick." "Rules are rules," Margaret said. "Although I suppose your situation was a bit unique. Most people don't just disappear for weeks without telling anyone." Lisa took a deep breath. "Can I ask you something? How did Jennifer manage to be the only bidder at the sale? I mean, $45,000 for a house worth so much more." Margaret smiled coldly. "Jennifer's very smart about real estate opportunities. She reads the legal notices religiously and acts fast when she sees a good deal." "But how did she even know about it?" "I never got any notices, and Mrs. Chen said she didn't see any posted signs." "Sometimes notices get lost in the mail," Margaret said with a shrug. "And we're not required to post signs in the neighborhood. Just in the newspaper and the courthouse." Lisa could feel her heart pounding. "It just seems like such a coincidence that your daughter happened to be the only person who knew about the sale." Margaret's smile got wider. "You know what, Lisa? You seem like a nice person who just got in over her head, so I'm going to give you some free advice. Sometimes life isn't fair. Sometimes people who know how to work within the system get better results than people who don't. That's not illegal. That's just smart." "So you're saying Jennifer was just smarter than everyone else?" "I'm saying my daughter knows how to recognize opportunities and act on them. Unlike some people who ignore their responsibilities and then whine when there are consequences." Lisa felt her anger rising, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Margaret, can I ask you something else? Did you know the postal worker who was supposed to deliver my legal notices?" Margaret's expression changed slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about. Mrs. Chen said she saw you talking to the mailman while I was gone. She said it looked like you gave him something. Mrs. Chen is a nosy old woman who sees things that aren't there." "So you never talked to the mailman about my mail?" Margaret stood up abruptly. "I think this conversation is over. You got yourself into this mess by being irresponsible. Don't try to blame other people for your problems." Lisa left Margaret's house with a recording that was definitely incriminating, but maybe not quite the full confession David had hoped for. Still, combined with all the other evidence he'd gathered, it might be enough. That evening, David listened to the recording and smiled grimly. "She's careful, but she definitely let her guard down a few times. Combined with everything else we have, I think we can make this stick. What happens now?" Now we arrest everyone involved and see who wants to make a deal. But Lisa, I want you to be prepared. This is going to get ugly before it gets better. Margaret isn't going to go down without a fight. David was right. But what Margaret didn't know was that the fight was already over. She just hadn't realized it yet. David spent 2 more weeks building his case before he was ready to make arrests. He wanted everything to be perfect because he knew Margaret would hire expensive lawyers and fight every charge. The investigation had grown bigger than anyone expected. David's team had uncovered a network of corruption that involved not just Margaret, but also Deputy Morrison, 2 postal workers, a county clerk, and 3 HOA board members who had been taking bribes to look the other way. This is actually a pretty big deal, David told Lisa the night before the arrests. We're talking about federal charges for mail fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. The FBI is getting involved because the scheme crossed state lines when Margaret tried to sell one of the stolen properties to buyers in Nevada. Lisa could hardly believe it. All of this because she wanted to steal my grandmother's house? It wasn't just your house, Lisa. We've now identified 6 properties that were stolen over the past 4 years. Margaret made over $800,000 from this scam. David had coordinated with federal agents to make sure all the arrests happened simultaneously. They couldn't risk anyone warning the others or destroying evidence. At 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, Margaret Walsh was in her kitchen making coffee when she heard loud knocking on her front door. She looked out the window and saw 3 police cars in her driveway. Margaret Walsh, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, and theft, David said when she opened the door. The look of shock on her face was priceless. This is ridiculous. I'm a respected member of this community. I'm the HOA president. Not anymore, David said, putting handcuffs on her. You have the right to remain silent. At the same time, Deputy Morrison was being arrested at the sheriff's office by FBI agents. The postal workers were taken into custody at their homes. The county clerk was arrested as he arrived at work. Jennifer and her husband were arrested at their house on Maple Street, the house that used to be Lisa's. By noon, the entire operation had been shut down, and all the major players were in custody. Lisa watched Margaret's arrest from Mrs. Chen's living room window. Seeing Margaret in handcuffs being put into a police car was one of the most satisfying moments of her life. I can't believe it's really over, Lisa said. Mrs. Chen patted her hand. That woman caused so much misery in this neighborhood. I'm just glad someone finally stopped her. The legal process moved quickly once people started talking. Deputy Morrison was the first to make a deal, providing detailed information about how the fake sheriff's sales were conducted in exchange for a reduced sentence. The postal workers admitted to intercepting mail for $300 per incident. The county clerk confessed to falsifying documents for $500 each time. Margaret's own HOA board members testified that she had threatened their jobs and their properties if they didn't go along with her schemes. But Margaret herself refused to cooperate. Even when her lawyer explained that she was facing 30 years in federal prison, she maintained that everything she did was legal. I was enforcing community standards, she told the judge at her arraignment. If people can't follow simple rules, they shouldn't live in a managed community. The judge was not impressed. Mrs. Walsh, you're accused of stealing over $800,000 worth of property through fraud and conspiracy. That has nothing to do with community standards. Jennifer and her husband made a deal quickly. They agreed to cooperate fully and return the stolen property in exchange for reduced charges. Jennifer's husband seemed genuinely shocked to learn that his mother-in-law was a criminal. I really thought we just got a good deal at an auction, he told investigators. I had no idea the sale was fake. The most satisfying part for Lisa was getting her house back. The court immediately voided the fraudulent sale and restored her ownership. Jennifer and her husband had to move out within 30 days. Lisa walked through her grandmother's house for the first time in months, touching the walls and remembering all the good times she'd had there as a child. The new owners had actually taken good care of the place, and the flower boxes still had some of Rose's original petunias blooming. Welcome home, David said, finding her sitting on the front porch steps. I still can't believe it's over. A few months ago, I thought I'd lost everything. You never gave up fighting. Grandma Rose would be proud of you. The other victims of Margaret's scam got their properties back too. The Henderson family was thrilled to return to their home. Mr. Henderson's cancer was in remission, and he'd been heartbroken about losing the house where he'd planned to spend his retirement. The Patel family had already bought another house, but they decided to sell their original property and use the money to start the small business they'd always dreamed of. Margaret's trial made headlines throughout the county. The prosecutor called it one of the most elaborate property fraud schemes we've ever seen. Margaret was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to all her victims, which meant selling her own house and liquidating all her assets. Deputy Morrison got 5 years for his role in the conspiracy. The postal workers and county clerk each got 2 years probation and hefty fines. Jennifer and her husband got community service and had to pay a $20,000 fine, but avoided jail time because they cooperated with the investigation. The Willowbrook Estates HOA was dissolved and completely reorganized. The new board implemented strict oversight procedures to prevent any one person from having too much power. Lisa decided to run for the new HOA board herself. "Someone needs to make sure this never happens again," she told her neighbors at the first community meeting. Mrs. Chen was elected as the new HOA president. Her first official act was to declare that garden gnomes were not only allowed, but encouraged. "Harold can come back home," Lisa laughed, pulling her grandmother's ceramic gnome out of storage. 6 months after Margaret's arrest, Lisa was sitting on her front porch watching the sunset when David stopped by after work. "How are you settling back in?" he asked. "It's been wonderful. The neighborhood feels completely different now. People actually talk to each other instead of being afraid all the time. I'm glad. You know, this case has become famous in law enforcement circles. We're using it as a training example for other departments." Lisa smiled. Grandma Rose always said that sometimes good things come from bad situations. She was right. Speaking of Grandma Rose, I found something when we were going through Margaret's confiscated belongings. David handed Lisa a small wooden box. This was in Margaret's house. Lisa opened the box and gasped. Inside was her grandmother's antique wedding ring, along with several other pieces of jewelry that had gone missing during the chaos of the fake sale. Margaret stole these when the movers packed up my stuff. She kept them like trophies. Well, now they're back where they belong. Lisa put on her grandmother's ring and looked at the house that had caused so much trouble. Now it just looked like home again. "You know what the best part is?" Lisa said. Margaret thought she was so smart, manipulating the system and taking advantage of people who couldn't fight back. But she never bothered to find out that the person she was messing with had a brother who was a police chief. David laughed. Sometimes the bad guys get cocky and make mistakes. Margaret's mistake was thinking she could get away with stealing from my family. That evening, Lisa called her father in Arizona to update him on everything that had happened. He was feeling much better and was amazed by the whole story. "I'm proud of you for not giving up," he said, "and I'm proud of David for doing the right thing even though it involved family." "We all learned something from this," Lisa said. "Family is more important than old grudges." A year later, Lisa still lived in her grandmother's house on Maple Street. She'd been promoted to head nurse at the hospital, and she was dating a nice guy she'd met at a community volunteer event. The house was worth even more now because the neighborhood had become known for its strong community spirit and lack of HOA drama. Property values had gone up across the board. Margaret was still in prison, reportedly spending most of her time writing letters to the parole board explaining why her sentences were unfair. None of her appeals had been successful. Lisa kept Harold the garden gnome in the flower boxes, right where her grandmother had originally placed him. She'd added a small plaque next to him that read, "In memory of Rose Martinez, who taught us that home is where love lives." Every morning when Lisa left for work, she touched the plaque and remembered her grandmother's words about not giving up without a fight. Margaret had thought she could steal more than just a house. She'd thought she could steal Lisa's connection to her family history and her sense of security. But in the end, justice had prevailed. The house was back in the family where it belonged, and Lisa had learned that sometimes the most important battles are the ones worth fighting for. The story became legendary in Willowbrook Estates. New residents were told about the time an HOA president tried to steal houses and ended up in federal prison because she picked on the wrong person's sister. And Harold the garden gnome still sat proudly in the flower boxes, watching over the neighborhood and making sure everyone remembered that home isn't just about following rules. It's about treating people with respect and kindness, something Margaret Walsh never learned even after 12 years to think about it.